as Desmond Buckmeyer. I am a dual degree major at Fayetteville State University, where I'm majoring in both accounting as well as business and finance. Nyla.
Good afternoon, everybody. As Tyshawn said, my name is Nyla Alvarez. I'm a senior at Fayetteville State University, and my major is Spanish, but my minor is in marketing. And Desmond.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Desmond Buckmeyer. I'm a senior also at Fayetteville State University, going for my bachelor's degree in business administration with a concentration in management. I'm also currently enrolled in the SAP Next Gen courses at Fayetteville State, one of the only universities in the southeastern region of the United States to offer these SAP courses. And it's a pleasure to meet all of you.
And with that being said, on behalf of our group, we'd like to thank you all for being with us today, and we hope that you all are safe and healthy at your homes as we anticipate the passing of this COVID pandemic. As Fayetteville State University first time competing in the IBECC, this has been a rewarding process that I'm sure we will look forward to participating in again in the future under better circumstances. So, going into our presentation, we offer the scenario as follows. We, the panelists, will represent a nonprofit privacy committee summoned by you, the judges, representing the large tech company Alphabet, tasked to present the issues of data selling, privacy infringement, and transparency. In efforts to persuade you to amend your privacy policies and to invest in the better security precautions. In hopes that as leaders of the industry, you can potentially spark a web-based consumers' right evolution, especially considering the spike of internet usage and methods COVID-19 has created, thus propelling your success and even adding to your future value. 2020 marks the 100th birthday of a woman who will live forever. It sounds impossible, but very true. Her immortality highlights the importance of security and regulations needed to protect citizens' valuables, privacy, and information. Today, microscopic pieces of her legacy have a price point ranging from $250 all the way up to $11,000 and can be accessed quickly by the click of your device. I'm sorry, it seems as though our slides aren't moving. Okay. I apologize, our slides seem not to be moving.
It's okay. If you can continue on and they can catch up with us, we will understand.
Okay. Her name is Miss Henrietta Lacks, and before the invention of the internet and web-based platforms, it was the medical research industry where people's personal data floated around in an, at the time, unregulated environment. Miss Lacks visited a segregated Johns Hopkins Institute January 21st, 1951. This was the day she was diagnosed with cervical epidermoid carcinoma, later re-diagnosed as adenocarcinoma. As it were, Johns Hopkins would be where she would receive her treatments and battle for her life all the way until her death later that year in early October 1951. During her many treatments within that year, as a common practice, medical professionals biopsied or harvested her cells unknowingly and without consent because, as stated earlier, there was yet no legislation determining it malpractice by the way of gross negligence. To the medical professional's disbelief, unlike most other patient cells who died initially after being harvested, Ms. Lack's cells kept reproducing through the process known as mitosis, growing in numbers every single day. Her cells would then go on to contribute to 3 Nobel Prizes, over 11,000 patents, and become the first commercialized cells in the medical industry, earning an incalculable amount of money. Why is it incalculable, you may ask? And that is a great question. That's due to the fact that no one knew these cells belonged to the late pioneer until almost 3 decades after her death. So there's no telling how many transactions occurred before we began to be followed by her estate. Yet, still no responsibility has been claimed. No transparency is given by who started the initial selling, and no rights of ownership was ever given to the family, resulting actions today that have resulted in very little justice to her name or contribution. Where is the correlation to the patron services? Again, another great question. In the words of Edmund Burke, those who don't know or learn from history are doomed to repeat it. In other words, if we continue to allow the rampaging of unregulated data mining, selling, and misguidance of consumer understanding in the web industry as we did in the medical industry years ago, large web-based companies like Alphabet are in danger of being blindsided with continued lawsuits, public disinterest, and overall loss of wealth for its stakeholders. Before we get into the ethical and legal connections, let's first take a look at how your data brokers work and earn revenue. You are a firm equipped with super software dedicated to scaffolding millions of pieces of information about millions of individuals at any given time. These practices not directly related to the mission, products, or services are then masked through the concept known as legitimate interest, a vague term with no clear defining guidelines that currently is the only source of authority for data regulation. Defined by the GDPR, not a welcoming friend of Alphabet, I might add, as some clear and specific benefit or outcome in mind, or as much of the populace feels that you see it, benefiting from cash with the outcome of profit. Creating a market with literally billions of people's data ranging from name, addresses, interest, history, and even the genetic DNA makeup of what is known in the business world as a blue ocean, meaning that there's vast opportunities in open markets, as opposed to a Red Sea, which is a shark-infested, highly competitive market. Making it possible for brokers like Foursquare, which is a partner of yourselves and Google, to generate over $150 million worth of revenue in 1 year, as they did in the year 2019, and an industry revenue of over $200 billion. Alphabet, like many other data collectors, harvested their information from web users using associated apps, search engines, and more. With Google harvesting the majority of its information while the users are inactive and not even using their search engines. Then assigning the information about people into different categories to sell to whom values it the most. For example, Forbes reported in 2015 that the Brokers World Privacy Forum were investigated by Senator Jay Rockefeller, and it was discovered that they categorized information of rape victims, of people with depression, and they sold this information for $79 per 1,000 articles of info of unknowing and without consent of the individuals. Does this sound familiar? There are currently 4 major factions of data brokers. Those factions being marketing, where the focus is targeted ads, risk and fraud mitigation, where the focus is the mitigation of risk for financial institutes, as well as people searching, where the focus is gathering the personal information of as many people as possible for anyone with $1 ready to spend. Here, we have the revenue report from the year 2013 issued by the Federal Trade Commission, from data brokers representing all mentioned fields with only accounting for 9. To better illustrate the potential danger of poor data practices, I have conducted a time series analysis on the Google stock and have pinpointed 3 occasions where price performance was poorer than average, with a focused attention to the times around primary scandals or breaches. November 2018, Google Plus was hacked and breached, and this cost a revenue of negative $55.5 million to Google stakeholders. In January 2019, Google was found guilty of not explicitly stating what their data was used for, stretching their clauses to 9 different pages and 6 actions to fully disclose the intentions. This cost Google stakeholders a revenue of negative $221.7 million. In March 2019, Google was fined by the European Union for abusive advertisement, and this cost Google stockholders a revenue of negative $34.4 million. This data does not include any fines paid out, only the equity lost by its stakeholders. It can be noted that Alphabet partakes in all of the aforementioned broker activities, and is not to say that the services produced should be completely wiped away. However, there are many ethical dilemmas that should be attended to uphold the mission, a mission that states the company wishes of improving transparency and oversight of what we're doing. making Google even better through greater focus. At this time, Desmond will now expound on these ethical dilemmas. Desmond?
Thank you very much, Tyshawn. So I want to ask the judges, do you know what kind of information may be gathered about yourself? Do you know the prevalence? Do you know when this information may have been generated by maybe your phone or an application that you're using? This is the main issue of this ethical dilemma. When we talk about the trustworthiness of companies such as Alphabet, like yourself, very prestigious, high-tier companies that value their shareholders and their stakeholders as an important part of their mission, you got to ask your consumers and the people that are having data collected about themselves, are we being trustworthy to them? Do we fulfill the hierarchical need of providing security for these individuals who are consenting to give their data? A lot of them unknowingly consenting to give their data. I also want to ask, where does the balance lie in these companies? Who receives the short end of the stick, so to say? I'd have to say consumers. Consumers don't know when their data is being tracked. They don't know when it's being sold. They don't know what is being sold for. And companies are making revenue without off of pretty much a free commodity. This information is being gained freely through the use of these applications. Now, the next question I want to ask is this fair? What does our future as consumers and information providers look like also amidst the COVID-19 crisis? As information is not only relevant, but important to researchers and virologists for tracking migration or infection patterns of COVID-19. How is the willingness of our data being collected or being sold, or us providing data, affected by the COVID-19 virus? I would like to also add that there are over 4,000 deemed data brokers within the United States alone that generate billions of dollars of revenue. And there are neither compensation nor incentives provided for the consumers who provide this information. So, are these companies taking into concern are these companies taking into consideration the concern for others? I'd also like to say that the companies such as yourself, it may not seem that way to consumers, that you are taking their best interests over your interests. All in all, the information that's being collected is being sold. There's profits and revenues being generated. But are the profits and revenues generated from these sales more desirable for a company to seek rather than the loyalty and longevity of customers? Everyone has private information, and people choose what they share on social media, but a lot of the times people don't know, hey, I'm sharing a post on Facebook, I'm sharing it only to my friends, only my friends will know about it. Now, Facebook has full authorization to extract information from that post about whether or not you like something, who you may like, if you have anybody you dislike, or products or services that you dislike. They can get all that information that you would have deemed somewhat private because you're sending it only to your friends. And amidst all this, we have to ask ourselves about the security of the information that is being provided. Also, I'd like to pose another question to the panelists. Amidst these data brokers, what information is important for them to accomplish their goals? If they're a marketing research firm and they're collecting information to gain marketing awareness about a certain area or a certain product or certain trends, what information are they purchasing that allows them to see an end to that goal? And what information is provided that isn't necessary for that goal? Are companies just buying information hand over fist and selling them because there is revenue and profit in it? It's a very strong possibility. With these actions taking place, how are companies taking into consideration empathy amongst their consumers? Some hard numbers about cases of identity theft are as follows on the screen. $1,300 on average are lost to victims of identity theft, victims who had some kind of monetary loss or deduction from their account. It usually takes them about 7 hours to get to reimburse their accounts, some of which aren't fully reimbursed to begin with. Over 14 million victims of identity theft in 2018. Would this information have been readily available for these identity thieves to gain if it wasn't for companies collecting so much information? On top of the information that's being collected, how transparent are our companies in showing us the data that's being collected? In the European Union, notably in the United Kingdom, there are laws set in place where companies are obligated to show you what information is being collected about you and to make it editable amongst the consumers whom the data was collected on. And as I posed a question earlier, what kind of information is available? Your date of birth, your social security, your address. A lot of the times you can Google search your name and your location, and unless you've paid for another service to go through the internet and clear searches related with terms that are in your name or searches that include your name, a lot of consumers aren't privy to that information, to that knowledge of that information being out there. The ones that are, they'll pay for the service to have that knowledge expunged off the internet. So who is accountable for this? On one hand, we have consumers that readily sign terms of agreement, privacy policies that somewhere in the depth of the agreement or policy, it agrees that the consumer is consenting to have their information sold. But also, what about these companies that acquired personal information and had something go wrong with it? How are they held to accountability standards? For example, Google, we heard about the Google streetcars in 2007. Also, Ashley Madison, a dating website in which millions of people's information were hacked by a group of hackers and were threatened to be made public. These companies issued apologies, but they weren't reprimanded for their data collecting activities legally, because it's essentially the Wild West out here with data miners and data collection. There are no regulations. If we do nothing about privacy and consumer protection, consumer data protection, we could further delay remedy of the issue. And I just want to mention that Alphabet is poised in a position to enact changes and to be an industry leader in showing that transparency is at the root of increasing consumer loyalty and trust between companies and consumers. With that being said, I'd like to turn it over now to Nalia to speak about the legal issues of our dilemma.
Thank you, Desmond. Good afternoon, everyone. As Desmond stated, my name is Nyla Alvarez, and today I'm here to discuss with you the legalities of the issue of privacy trade-offs for security during COVID-19. I'm stressing the urgency. Federal agencies in charge of policing data breaches are now backing off their enforcement of certain privacy rules. Their goal is to make it easier for hospitals to share patient information with public health officials. Meanwhile, the nation's large tech industries are collecting this valuable health information and saving it through COVID-19 symptom checkers. This data can be proven invaluable to disease trackers when combined with travel and location data for mobile phones. While the relaxing of health privacy rules can be justified during a time of crisis, the question now becomes, what will happen after the pandemic fades? Is the idea to go back to normal, or will the new invasion of privacy become a part of the American healthcare system? Will this be accepted as the price of continued caution against new outbreaks? And will we, the American citizens, agree to our loss of privacy after this pandemic, as we did after the 9/11 terrorist attacks? In the United States, we have a government agency known as the Federal Trade Commission. Their mission is to enforce the promotion of consumer privacy. During this time of COVID-19, the Federal Trade Commission has stated that they will go after companies that take any action that is inconsistent with their privacy policies or that would be misleading to consumers. In 2001, the United States passed the Patriot Act. This act facilitated information sharing and cooperation among government agencies so that they can better connect information. However, this was only intended to be used during a time of terrorism. There have been opportunities to debate whether the surveillance capabilities enabled by this Patriot Act should be allowed during the COVID-19 time. But due to the rapid increase of the coronavirus cases and the urgency of the health threat, there was no time to come to a decision. Therefore, until a decision is made, government officials cannot use the Patriot Act of 2001 to rationalize their decisions. The Privacy Act of 1974 was very important legislation intended for data minimization and anonymization, the right to user access, and the right to correction. This act offers no freedom of deletion, no freedom of demonetization, and no freedom of expunged data memory for future use. This act only applies to the US federal government and not private corporations. The nation's primary health law is known as the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, or HIPAA for short. This law includes language that allows federal officials to waive privacy rules in case of a public health emergency. However, this law was passed in 1996. This was a time when health data was mostly in the hands of health officials, hospitals, and insurance companies. It has not been changed to include health data tracking down by major companies such as Apple, Google, or Alphabet. To follow the HIPAA guidelines, government officials are only allowed to share the age group of the patient, the general location of the patient, whether they tested positive, where they are being treated, and their condition. With COVID-19 making its way to the United States, the Department of Health and Human Services, or HSS for short, released a statement in February saying that the privacy and security safeguards placed under HIPAA cannot be set aside during an emergency. Minimal information can be shared, but only to other hospitals or regulators in two specific cases. The first one of these is to provide treatment to the patient, and the second being to stem the spread of COVID-19. Realizing the urgency of the health crisis, HSS released a second statement in April. This statement waived all HIPAA sanctions, but only towards hospitals. Therefore, legally, big data companies can still only share the minimum information allowed under HIPAA. In the United States, location tracking has become the new topic of conversation during this public health crisis. President Trump has reportedly been in discussions with large tech companies about using the mobile location data to track the citizens. In 2018, California implemented a law known as the California Consumer Privacy Act. With this act, consumers must be given the opportunity to opt out of information sharing. It also protects the rights of consumers and allows them to tell a business not to share or sell personal information. In 2019, the Federal Trade Commission sued Facebook Inc. company on the aspect that Facebook violated its privacy promises. The decision was that Facebook had to establish and implement a new privacy policy that is designed to, first, address privacy risk, and secondly, protect the privacy and confidentiality of all covered information. The content that was being kept at Facebook and shared and the implementation of it must be documented in writing. As we can see with this case, if no new policies are put in place, there remains the possibility of new lawsuits, not only by the FTC, but also by consumers who believe that they are not being protected. We can also go further and see what is happening in the world as we all face this health emergency. In South Korea, government officials have begun tracking more than just health information. They have begun tracking location, surveillance, camera footage, and credit card transactions. They are also tracking the movements of infected patients so that information can be given to the public. In Europe, all data that is used and shared must first be anonymized. Their data protection law is still 100% fully in place. In Italy, the government has asked for anonymized data from Facebook so that they can trace users' movements. In the United Kingdom, there has been discussions about mapping mobile users' movements and keeping the data. And in Israel, the location data has been shared with state agencies for contact tracing, and they have also relaxed the rules around warrants being needed for consumers' data. So as you can see, there are many dilemmas concerning this issue. We have come up with a variety of solutions that can help your company keep the consumer's best interest at the core. The first would be for your company to release an updated privacy policy that clearly states the information that is being collected, that is being shared, and how it's being shared. This information needs to be clearly identified before the user is able to accept or decline the new policy. With this update, it would also be beneficial to have an option for the consumer to opt out of certain data sharing and collecting. This gives the consumer control over their personal information. With the California Consumer Protection Act, we can already see the benefits of having an opt-out option, the main one being greater trust between the consumer and corporation. And now I'll pass it on to Desmond.
Hello. So some solutions that I thought were relevant for this case and could increase consumer loyalty with the brand or whichever brand which is collecting information was to compensate users for their personal information. There are some compensation programs such as loyalty cards that can track purchases and provide discounts for consumers. But a lot of the information that is being gained, biometric information, location information, movement information, things of that nature, there is no kind of compensation provided for consumers who have that data collected from them. Companies should also be obligated to disclose what information is collecting about what types of consumers or users of their applications. Also, in lines with what I was talking about from the United Kingdom, I believe that another good policy to enact is to make that information readily viewable, readily accessible by the consumers so they know exactly what is being put out there. And for the conclusion of our solutions, I'll now pass it on to Tyshawn.
So what is the most cost-effective and practical way for you, Alphabet, to incorporate these solutions? Well, we suggest financing a third-party special agency, which we have dubbed the DPPA, the Data Policy Protection Agency, ensuring it a third party so that you can eliminate any biases. In doing so, as my teammates have alluded to, you can assure that your company stays ahead of the trend for the right of consumers on the internet. Just with the 3 examples alone, your stockholders have lost a net worth of over $311.6 million due to a drop in the public trust levels. When you consider the importance of trust in leadership and business ethics, you must understand why trust is important to customers. Public trust is essentially seen as the greatest asset a company or organization or brand can have. When a company with trust is a company with value. Value drives everything. Value drives everything from sales, revenue, and overall performance. When the populace trusts your business's integrity, the business can stay safe, even as we experience pandemics like this one. Because across the nation and the world, firms who have the loyalty of their consumers can guarantee that as they make changes to their model, their consumer base will adapt. To sum up this philosophy, I recall the words of US Congressman Mike Quigley: the real cost of corruption, whether it be local, state, or federal, is the loss of public trust. Thank you. We now open the floor for questions and answers.
Thank you. And let me just quickly say, I think you guys did a wonderful job. You indicated in the beginning, this is your first time. Make no further excuses. You're ready. You did a great job. And I will let the other judges, the other panel members ask you some questions and give you a chance to respond to those, and then we will give some feedback.
Thank you, sir.
Mike, you want to start?
Okay, thank you all. I thought it was a great presentation. One of the things I had a question about was, you talk about data, but then I think you need to distinguish between, or you need to figure out what data should be maintained and should not be shared, and what data should be shared. I'm just curious about that. What data do you think should be kept? What data can be shared amongst other companies?
Tyshawn, do you want to answer? Or?
I can start off with this one. Well, what we believe is that Alphabet obviously has access to data from search engines, from data from apps, and anything else that a consumer might use. So what we're saying is that we don't believe that as I stated earlier, that these services and products should be completely wiped. However, the consumer should have a right to know why and how their data is being used. If you're choosing to share the data, as long as the consumer consents to that, as well as knows where you're selling the data, where you got the data from, and even has the option of opting out of the data and still having access to your apps. I'd say 95% of the apps offered by Alphabet and Google, if you don't agree to the terms and policies, if you do read the whole 10 pages and you decide, I don't want my data to be sold, I don't want my data to be collected, then they don't even allow you services to the apps. Well, we believe that if you change this policy and you make it where the consumer can still use this app, knowing that you don't necessarily need their data, it will heighten your value as far as the public trust. If that answers your question.
Yes, thank you very much.
Yes, I'd also like to add to that the information that's predominantly collected and sold by these data brokers, they can compile thousands of pieces of information. Your dislikes, your likes, your shopping history, your birthday, your address. Some of those things are very personal. Birthday, address, the bank that you use. I believe that type of information is what's causing a lot of distrust between consumers and with companies collecting their data, because they don't know what type of information is being collected. It is an extensive list, though, of different types of information.
Thank you.
Thank you for your question.
Aylin, would you like to? Are you with us? Let's move on to Mari.
Pardon, I was on mute. So I do have a question about your proposal that users be compensated for their personal information. So knowing that companies such as Google and Facebook offer their services for free, how do you find that this will square with the business model of a company like Alphabet? Will this be losing the company money in the long run in the revenues that they generate from marketing, advertisements, etc.?
I don't believe it'll lose companies money in the long run. I actually believe that it'll help boost consumer loyalty and bring in more customers further down the line who'll be willing to provide information that's helpful for these marketing firms. like you said, these platforms are provided for free, but Facebook isn't doing all of that for free. They're still making money, and the money that they're making is from having people advertise on their platform, business ads, business pages, and stuff. Um, they may ask that you pay for some services. Like if you started a Facebook business page, you can pay to have your advertisement expounded, and the company makes money through those means as well as selling data information about marketing trends and the so forth. I believe that, and I read an article about this. They compared this data mining and data collecting to when oil started becoming a commodity. Now, when oil first started, people were going around, they're prospecting land and stuff, and then, oh, they found a good place, they would put a well there, and the money would, oil is pumped, and then they sell the oil, they make money. These apps and platforms, these apps and platforms are almost like the surveyors of the oil age. And the oil is all the information that's being pumped from users and consumers around the world that use these applications. So there is little regulation over data collection and data selling in the United States, but it is a lucrative market behind this practice.
Okay.
I would like to also add, as all business affiliated, we all know that there's no such thing as free lunch. And, just because compensation doesn't necessarily have to mean that direct compensation, as in Facebook or you Alphabet give your consumers money every month or every time you use their data. However, as Desmond stated, referring to the analogy of oil, whenever these corporations or whenever you Alphabet decide, okay, we're going to focus on creating data information from this specific area. Maybe you can compensate by giving back to that community, making sure that that community is able to grow and to become more developed. And that way, if you develop your company, if you develop neighborhoods and if you develop areas around where you're collecting this data information from, it'll make consumers more easygoing in using your product. And then with them using your product, then you actually have an opportunity to collect even better data than just, doing it unknowingly, in my opinion.
Right.
And just add to that to kind of finish our answer. I think I agree with my teammates on both of their answers, and that also, if we give consumers the option to opt out of things, or if we can clearly tell them what we're using their information for, it creates a greater bond and a bigger trust between both the customer and the company, which could ultimately lead to more consumers in the future.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I suppose just as a quick follow-up from Michael's question then, do you believe that consumers should be compensated for all of their data across the board? For instance, if I Google search a vacuum because I want to buy a vacuum, then it kind of gives my information to companies that might be able to help me with that purchase. Would you feel that that is worthy of compensation on the same level as, health data or other personal information?
Desmond.
I feel like in the sense that if you're searching for a vacuum and you might have looked on Amazon and then you go onto Google and it pulls up another list of vacuums, that information, it may, I mean, in my opinion, I feel like it would be best that companies tell the consumer, hey, we're pulling this information, and there be any kind of incentive for consumers to want to provide information. Compensation may be one form of incentive, but maybe an access to other services besides just a primary service, if they are willing to consent to give data And also, as Malia was saying, I believe in the opting out of giving data, that should be a more prevalent option in the use of these applications.
And going to scenario, you search a vacuum cleaner in Google, then let's say you're using your phone, and then you decide that, okay, I found what I wanted to find, now I'm going to log out. So now Google decides to go and find out where you're located at, where's the last place you've been, where you search for the vacuum cleaner at, and what's near you. And then let's say that they decide to sell that information about your location to someone else who is not even, has anything to do with a vacuum cleaner or has anything to do with any type of product that you're looking for. Then that becomes a problem of transparency.
That's a good example. Thank you.
Maury?
Okay, thanks. First of all, congratulations to the team. Very well done on a very coherent presentation, notwithstanding the obvious physical and technological challenges, which I think you've overcome extremely well. So well done. I was seeing a distinction between the broader general issues around data privacy from the business, legal, and ethical standpoint, and the current crisis, which was the title slide of your presentation. And I think maybe we need to draw some distinctions between the world as it was 6 weeks ago and the world as it is now for the foreseeable future. For example, in the current crisis situation, and I'm sitting here in Spain, where the death toll reached 20,000 a number of days ago. So we've been very severely impacted, and we've all been on lockdown at home for 6 weeks. So I'm probably seeing it through that prism. In that context, some of the business issues, which might be very relevant in the old world, let's just say, might not be very relevant at the moment, where we're talking about life and death and how you prevent thousands more people from being admitted to the medical system and from dying an early death. So I think that obviously impacts the subject that we're discussing. I've got two questions in terms of whether you drew a distinction in your discussions between different types of data. And obviously under GDPR, which I'm more familiar with, there are clear distinctions between generic personal data and more sensitive categories of personal data. So whether that impacted your analysis at all, the two principal categories of sensitivity on the data. And the second question is, as everybody's currently working from home, there's been some commentary around the challenges of data protection and IT security when people are not in the normal working conditions of their institution or their company. So wondering whether you consider that that has any impact under the current situation. Thank you.
To start off, I believe I would like to introduce the theory of behavioral genetics. And this is basically a concept in which scientists have found ways to figure out the way a person thinks, the way a person moves, based off of, as you called it, generic information, such as location, where you travel, where you go, where you buy things at, the type of things that you buy. All of these are then used to sort of create a artificial version of who you are. So I believe that anytime that that data privacy should be, taken very seriously, whether it's genetic or if it's considered more personal, because I can figure out your more personal information based off of the generic information that you've already given. And as far as the how does data privacy, or how does tracking people, play into the saving lives of individuals during this pandemic, I've done my research and I found that this could be a huge problem, because if you, let's say, Facebook and Apple, all of these large tech companies who are teaming up with these governments to track people's locations and to see where they're going, especially those who've already been tested positive for the disease. if you only focus on the individuals who you're tracking the context of, what about those individuals who don't have cell phones? I believe there is a huge disparity between the individuals who are receiving treatment as far as class goes. If you are more higher up or in the more upper echelon side of the world, then it's easy for these governments to see where you are, to see who you've passed by, because it's more easily available for you to go purchase a phone or for you to purchase technological equipment. Whereas individuals who are in poor parts of the world or poor areas of certain countries, they might not have access to this. So you're essentially negating these individuals because they don't have access to these technologies. So the equity between the amount of resources provided to these people are, again, night and day. And I do would like to extend my sincerest empathy for you, your family, and all of those in Spain. I hope that, as everything gets better, that those individuals, not only who are affected, recover, but those individuals who have lost loved ones, are condoled.
Thank you, Tasha.
Thank you.
I have a question. You've mentioned GDPR a number of times. Do you think something like GDPR should be enacted in the United States?
Absolutely.
Yes.
I'm gonna try not to talk as much this time as my other teammates would like to respond.
Yes, and why?
Well, the protection of consumers should be of higher importance or priority within these Fortune 500 companies, such as Alphabet, such as Google, such as Facebook. And we heard about how Google was fined around 50 million euros, I believe, sometime recently because they violated the GDPR rules in regards to privacy and data collection. It's almost like a snowball effect. I like to think about it, because as more information is produced daily, and we're living in the information age, there's more information produced today just through interactions on social media or through the internet than at any time before in history. And that information can be collected and sold without regulation within the United States. Going off of what Murray was saying, with the difference between generic information and non-generic information, we understood those categories, and we just decided to clump them all together because in the data market in the United States, it's essentially clumped all together already. All that information is just out in the open, is available for sale, and then that also leads into problems such as identity theft. Hackers, they have more access to more information because these companies are collecting more information, and the companies, they don't seem to have any accountability in that sense. If information was gained from their database about somebody else and sold on the dark web, as some like to say, through illegal transactions and stuff, that person who provided the information, they can't really do anything. They signed over the consent of that information.
And also, in a more practical way, you say, why should the U.S. adopt policies or legislation that is similar to the GDPR? Well, America is seen across the world as supposedly, the leader of the free nation. So if we're and holding that title means that your citizens should have, these expected rights of privacy in all aspects of life, whether it be physical or web-based. Also, I believe that the reason that we've proposed this to you, Alphabet, is because as a leader in the tech industry, we believe that if you jump on board with these and you push these policies and you show the right way to do certain things as far as the rights of consumers on the web, then many of the other markets will start to follow, because they will see your success and they will see that you are gaining more value in your stocks and more value in your price per share in consideration to others.
can take one more question from one of the judges if there are any more. If not, I'm sorry. If there are no more questions, let me just wrap it up by making, sure.
I just had a question on a business perspective. For the service you're providing, are you proposing to charge, or is this being done on a non-profit basis?
Well, the service that we could provide is obviously from a nonprofit basis, but it would have to be financed or granted funds from Alphabet if you all choose or decide to go further with the actions. And with that being said, as you funding a nonprofit, then getting into the accounting side of it, you're able to depreciate it from your taxes, depreciate it from your expenses, and holistically save even more money for the shareholders.
Okay, you sold it to me. Thanks.
Okay, let me start this point of feedback by just saying I think you guys did a fantastic job under the circumstances. There was a little technical challenge, but I was really happy to see that you were able to move on and let that catch up with you. So I don't think it impacted the quality of your presentation whatsoever. I loved your opening and that you opened with a scenario that really captured my attention and made me think about how it could be transferable to today's pandemic. The one suggestion I would make to you is, because in the 10-minute and the 90-second presentations, you will focus solely on the ethical issues, stick with those very closely and make sure that you clearly identify who you're making your presentation to. I kept hearing you making your presentation to Alphabet, but I'm not sure whether it was the board of directors at Alphabet, whether it was senior leadership, whether it was the CEO. Make it very pointed as to who you're making your presentation to. That way, in the judge's role, they will come back to you as those individuals. But thank you again, and I'll move ahead, Michael, to any questions or feedback you may have for them.
Thank you,
Just
sir.
a couple of comments. One is I would actually love to see the first 6 or 7 slides, if you can do that. That's the first thing. A second thing is I think you can link, it's a direct link between Henrietta Lett and the ethical issues later raised. So, right off the bat, to me, that started off with ethics. Just 2 comments. There's no such thing as negative revenue. It's either costs or losses or expenses, but not negative revenue. Other comment was this concept of unknowingly consent. You either consent or you don't consent. How do you not know you're consenting? That's just, to me, that is a contradiction of terms. But other than that, I thought it was good. I thought you all had some very strong voices and points to make.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Okay, Caitlin?
Absolutely. Well, first of all, congratulations to the team. I think your ideas were well presented. I followed the logic of your presentation. I think by way of a bit of feedback, I think that first of all, when you present your solutions in the following, in the upcoming presentations, you have a range of solutions. And so I think being able to succinctly say which ones I would say are at the top. And I had a question during the presentation of how this would be potentially implemented. Alphabet has a broad range of services that they offer, and so ways to integrate this I was interested in. And then I think speaking a little bit more to ways that people's information can be used to harm them outside of identity theft, for instance. You gave really good examples, and I think just part of me was curious to hear more.
Thank you.
Okay, Maury?
Okay, so some feedback. sort of general and specific. And the idea is hopefully that some of this may be useful when you come to do the shorter versions of this, if you have time to discuss which bits of the collective feedback you want to take on board, which you agree with, which you don't. I think you tackled a very broad topic, and the phrase is less is more. So it might be worth thinking, should we tackle one little sort of slice of this pie and actually just focus on that? Because my concern was you were touching on so many different areas that I got a little bit lost into what's the general analysis, legal, business, ethical around data privacy, which is a vast topic, and what's the COVID-19 implications of that. So it might be worth being a little bit more focused, tackling less subject matter, but defining the problem more clearly, and also for your audience. In terms of the team dynamics, because that's always the human aspect that fascinates me, and this is a particular scenario we're dealing with, tonight with the technology. I'd like to see a little. Sorry, you can probably hear my son screaming in the background in the other room. That's why I just closed the door. I'd like to see you a little bit more as a team, and what I mean by that is I know you're all separately located, which makes it very challenging, and the technology doesn't help that. It felt a little separated in terms of the flow and the focus. So with the different presenters on the different issues, I'd like to see somehow a little bit more connected up within all of that. And perhaps, I don't know if this is allowed in the constraints of the IBECC process, but perhaps to echo, I think, Michael's comment, maybe the ethics was where you should have started on this. To me, particularly if you're focusing on the crisis, the business issue perhaps is less important to that particular current application. And even in terms of your team presentation, one thing that you might have thought about, maybe you did and you considered it not feasible, but you from what we can see on the screen here, you seem to have dressed in different ways. So, sometimes you see teams who all wear the same colored t-shirt, or whether there was something you could have done now, or maybe you can even do tomorrow if the format permits, that you've got the same backdrop. You can very easily, as I've done here on Zoom, you can put on one of the standard backdrops, or you can put a photograph up as a backdrop. That if you had all the consistent sort of branding, whether it was a backdrop or the way you're dressed, it might make it seem a little bit more joined up, just as a soft factor to try and influence your audience.
Thank you, sir.
Good, thank you.
I think that Murray had a very good point when he spoke to the issue of less is more, because I think you had an issue that you could have built a whole presentation around the Henrietta Lacks and the ethics in that. You could have built a whole presentation around the ethics in terms of the data gathering that Alphabet does on its own. There is a whole presentation that can be done around the COVID-19. You put a lot of things in there, you packed a lot of in, and I think that the knowledge that you all have of all of those, if you sort of synthesize those down into one of those topics, you will have a very, very powerful presentation.
Thank you, sir.
I would also add one thing again with the if you could just relate Henrietta Lack to the COVID-19, meaning what responsibility do individuals have who have COVID-19 to provide contact information, travel information, and everything else like that to the medical profession? One, if I have it, do I have an ethical
Obligation.
Yes, to go and say, oh, I saw this person, I talked to this person, I did whatever. And then once this medical organization compiles this information, do they then have a responsibility to use that information to measure, you know, the curve and things like that? So, you know, there's ethical responsibilities from both the consumer side as well as the business or organizational side.
Yeah, and I think maybe the overarching question is, you know, when we're in a crisis situation, when we're in a war situation,
right,
do the normal norms in terms of ethics, in terms of legalities, in terms of business drivers, do they apply? Or if they're disapplied, are there any limits on the disapplication, either in time or in scope?
Because remember, the Patriot Act was passed after 9/11. And people could understand the reason for the act. However, there were still others that said, I think you're going too far. So again, just to piggyback on what Murray said, that's a thread that can go throughout your presentation and tie it all together.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Well, thank you all very much. Thank you for participating. We appreciate you going the extra mile to be a part of this. And especially since it was your first time doing it, we hope that you will participate again in the future. And we think that stepping up to do what you have done under these circumstances will certainly be of benefit to you going forward in life, when you can look back and say that we stepped up and we went this extra mile to do something for our education as well as for the ethics environment. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.